It's a little terrifying because you absolutely cannot miss.
Goalies now are completely at a premium.
Not, right? Like, Canada doesn't have a ton of great options.
What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the big show, brought to you by Sticks.com. I'm Michael Traikos. With me, as always, Ryan Kennedy, and favorite guest of the show, Drew Shore, coming back again. Drew, how's the summer been? You see any good movies? I guess, with Katie Goss not here, I'd be remiss not to ask if you've seen Happy Gilmore too.
I actually have not seen Happy Gilmore 2 yet, and I had it loaded up to watch the other night, and my two young daughters both vetoed what was going on the TV. And between them and my wife, I don't have a lot of say on what goes on the TV these days, especially when there's no sports going on.
Fair enough. Well, we're going to have you on, I guess, next week as well. So you got some little homework. You got to watch it. You got to tell us who your favorite cameo is and whether this is a hockey movie or not.
Did you guys, I assume you guys both watched it. Did you enjoy it? Because I've heard everything from I had to turn it off halfway through to it was great.
For me, it was exactly what I expected it would be, which is like fun nostalgia. It wasn't like incredible, but it's fun to see those characters again.
Yeah, better than I expected. The cameos really set it apart for me. Like they really went out of their way to get like a whole list of A-list cameo appearances. So that's what my favorite, cameo. I think my least favorite was probably Eminem. My favorite was probably Bad Bunny. But yeah, we'll talk more about this next week, Drew. So make sure you watch it and let us know what you think. But yeah, we are in the dog days of summer. That's why we're talking movies right off the start. Not to say that there isn't hockey news, because we've got a jam-packed show as always, but let's start out there because, this is the time of year, Drew and Ryan, that, GMs can go, bargain hunting. There's still quite a few players still out there. Everyone from Jack Roslovic, Victor Olofsson, Ilya Samsonov, Max Pacioretty still out there. Ryan, start us off. Who do you think teams should be targeting right now?
Well, it's really interesting because I think we're at the point in the summer where everything is going to be kind of team oriented with these free agents. You're now at the point where all the big names are off the board and you're trying to maybe fill holes. So, Jack Roslovic is sort of seen as the top free agent, but, he has specific roles that he can fill. And at this point, you can probably get him for a decent price. Maybe it's kind of like 4 or 5 million. I've always thought that Jack Roslovic was better as a winger. I know he has played center, but I remember watching him with the NTDP and he played on the wing. I think he might have played on Auston Matthews' line, if I'm not mistaken. And, he had that north-south game going, using his speed. And I thought he was very effective. I think, right now in the NHL, he's probably like a middle six guy. So, for a team that needs a bit of speed and needs some depth, I think Roslovic is probably an interesting option. And then it's just a matter of, who's got the cap space and who has that need.
Yeah, Roslovic is a guy that the Leafs are apparently looking at. Funny enough, you mentioned the Matthews connection, Ryan, and word is that they're trying to move out either David Kampf or Calle Jarnkrok or even Nick Robertson to make room for Roslovic. And last year, I'm just looking at the numbers here: 22 goals, 39 points for a guy who's 28 years old. His cap hit was $2.8 million, and you probably at this point can get him under $4 million. To what you're saying. Well, what do you think, Drew? Is Roslovic, still maybe at the top of this list?
Yeah, I think he's at the top of the list. I think if I was a team, Max Pacioretty would be the guy that I'd be going after. I think he's a guy who I think people forget how good of a player he was for such a long time in the league. And then obviously had the injuries, didn't play a lot, but it seemed like he kind of found his stride again, especially in the playoffs for the Leafs. And I think that he'd be a guy who I'm sure it's more of a family decision for him in terms of, I know he's got a bunch of kids and where he wants to live. But if I was a GM in the league on a competitive team, I'd be begging to try and get him to come in on a 1 or 2 year deal, because I think he's a guy who's made a ton of money and cares probably more about the fit than the money at this point of his career. And I think he still has a lot left in the tank.
Throwing it out here, obviously he was the former captain of the Habs. With that young Habs team, would you consider bringing back Pacioretty and seeing what he was able to do for Toronto in the playoffs?
Yeah, I think that'd be awesome. And I think it'd be a great storyline. And I think, like you just said, regardless of how effective he's going to be, and I think he showed in the playoffs that he definitely can still be effective, but I think he'd be a huge boost to that locker room as well.
Yeah. I always sort of joke that like Max Pacioretty is basically hockey Deadpool in that he has catastrophic injuries, but he always bounces back eventually. He's not like funny like Deadpool, but otherwise.
He got some bad injuries too. Like he got injured in practice. But
he had terrible ones too. Like the one where Chara like put him into the stanchion. Yeah, like he has brutal injuries. And he always comes back.
I'm surprised we don't see that more often. I don't know if it's a unwritten rule, Drew, that when you get a guy's so vulnerable at that point in the rink. Like I don't know why more guys don't get turnbuckled like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think guys are aware of it, and obviously that there's certain situations that you can't control. But I mean, I think that at his age, obviously it took him it would take anyone to come from an Achilles injury. I think that was his last big one to come back from. And I definitely think like it took him some time. And I think he was just probably average for his standards during the regular season for the Leafs. But I think anyone who can play at that level in the playoffs certainly is deserving of a 1 or 2 year deal.
How about the goaltenders? It kind of surprised that Ilya Samsonov, who not too long ago, like I think we're talking maybe 2 years, was a number 1 goalie for the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's only 28 years old, still a good age. I know the numbers don't really justify it, but you're a bit surprised that he hasn't been snatched up with how many teams are looking for depth goaltending.
I mean, it is interesting because he is so streaky, right? Like if you get good Ilya Samsonov, then you're getting like a legit NHL starter. But if you're getting bad Samsonov, then it's basically replacement level. And I think that's the challenge right now is that goaltending, it should be a big investment for a team because it does matter. And are you getting the right fit? And I think it's funny, like every year, you do have your usual suspects, your Hellbucks and your Shesterkins and guys like that, Vasilevsky, where it's like, you know that they're going to be very good, if not the best. But then there's a whole range of guys where you hope that this is a good year for them, but you don't know for sure. And sometimes a guy will come out and surprise you and have a lights out season like a Darcy Kemper or a Logan Thompson. And then you kind of have to review everything that's going on. So if you're a team, I think you can take a chance on Samsonov. He's certainly better than some of the other options out there that are already signed, but it's a matter of finding a team that has that need that's willing to take a chance.
Yeah, I think it's funny how the goaltending narrative shifts. I mean, I think a lot of people forget when the Blues won the Cup. You guys might know this, so correct me if I'm wrong here. But wasn't Jordan Binnington in the AHL the first half of the year? I believe he was, and then he got called up like in January when the Blues were dead last or whatever it was and went on that run. So it's a funny position because it's so streaky. And then if you even look at like the contractual side of that, like people were saying Bobrovsky the first 2 or 3 years of that deal were like that was written by it probably was written by the Hockey News, but I'm just kidding. But like it was written by basically everyone in media about being one of the worst contracts in the NHL. And people were kind of got away from the narrative that you don't need to pay a goalie $9-10 million to win and stuff like that. And then that narrative after Tampa and the run that they went on with their goaltending and now Florida, it's completely kind of shifted back the other way.
Totally. I will fully admit I wrote that several times that like that $10 million contract at the beginning was the worst in the league. Like they couldn't trade it. Even if they wanted to, there was like nobody willing to go anywhere near Bobrovsky. And then obviously history has borne out that he bounced back in a major way with a better team in front of him. And now he is a back-to-back Stanley Cup champion and probably a Hall of Famer at this point.
Yeah.
And it's funny too.
The Edmonton Oilers too. Like, obviously they don't have a guy in Skinner or Pickard that you want to give $10 million to, but on any given day, those guys can get you to the Stanley Cup final.
Yeah. And I think too, if you look at it too, so much of that position is team dependent. I mean, you see guys like back in the day, Ben Scrivens is a friend of mine who played in LA when they were giving up 20 shots a game for several years. And most of those weren't grade A chances. And he had an amazing couple seasons there. And then he gets traded to Edmonton when they weren't the Edmonton Oilers that we know today and really struggled. And like, obviously his level of play probably didn't really drop off, but even for good goaltenders in the NHL, so much of it is team dependent and kind of how they play.
So Drew, like obviously you've been through the free agency ringer a number of summers. You know, what's it like at this point where you're stretching into August or even right as soon as July 1 opens, trying to find a new team? Like what goes into that?
Well, it's stressful. I mean, you see now the way things work in the NHL that so many of those deals are done almost leading up to July 1st, if not on July 1st. And a lot of times as a player and now even as an agent, like normally your first deal or couple deals are as good as it gets. Like it very rarely, like the price very rarely goes up for a player as the summer kind of prolongs. So I think that it starts to get more stressful. And then, like you said, I think that, I mean, it's different for every guy depending where they are in their career, but I assume like a guy like Jack Roslovic, I mean, like you guys said, he scored 22 goals. I think that's the most he's had in the league. That's a very respectable number for a middle six forward. And I'm sure he's pretty stressed right now.
I wonder if he's also thinking, okay, where's the best fit for me where I can build off of that 22 goal season? And he's thinking ahead to his maybe next contract going, okay, well, I don't want this to be the last one I sign. So I better find a spot where I can make an impact, you know, whether it's in Toronto or somewhere else, but where he can showcase some of that ability.
Yeah. And then, I mean, then it gets to a guy like him. Like, what do? Do you sign a 2-year deal? Like, I mean, we all know how the Carolina Hurricanes do things. I'm surprised they didn't offer him like an 8-year deal at $2 million or something and try and get that done. But I think that, like I said, then you kind of got to be strategic with it, like you said. And it's also like, I think part of the contract stuff that a lot of people don't understand is it kind of comes down to what the player like believes he is. Like if Jack Roslovic believes he's a third line player, like a good third line player, then maybe it might make, and he's coming off a 22 goal season, it might make sense to sign a 5-year deal at a little bit of a lower number. But if him and his agent believe that he's continually getting better, he scored 22 goals last year, he might score 30 goals on a more offensive team this year, it might make sense to sign a 2-year deal, especially if it's in a place like Toronto with good offensive players where maybe he plays with an Auston Matthews and then has another career high and as the cap continues to go up. So I think a lot of it from that perspective comes down to what the player and his agent kind of believe his high-end potential is. And I think that's something that the media and people don't really realize. And you see a lot of like the entry-level deals. You know what I mean? Like some of those guys for a while were all kind of signing like the 7x7 or 8x8s. Like if you look at like the Jack Hughes deal, he didn't have a great first year or two in the league. And I think he signed, I'm not sure on this, but like a 7x7 or a 7x8. But I mean, he's arguably a $12 million player in the game today, especially with where the cap is. So I think a lot of it comes down to kind of just where you feel you fit into the league.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I remember talking to an agent not long ago, and he was saying he had a client and there was a 2-way contract on the table. So, you know, he gets paid a certain amount in the AHL if he's there, a certain amount in the NHL if he's in the NHL. And this player said, no, like it's got to be a 1-way deal. And the agent was like, you know what? Like, I think you should take it, because if you don't take this offer in, you know, late June, they're just going to go to somebody else. And sure enough, that slot got filled. And I think the player ended up either signing for less or maybe even going to Europe because he, you know, and he probably would have spent the whole year in the NHL. So the 2-way part of it wouldn't really have mattered. But I'm interested, Drew, just in, I guess there's probably a bit of a stigma about if you consider yourself an NHL regular already and a team is only offering a 2-way deal. But, you know, how do you factor in, you know, when you were, you know, going after those contracts, you know, what it meant for not only your short-term future, but maybe the long-term as well?
Well, I think you got to look at it from a couple sides. From the team's perspective, they obviously like the flexibility of having you on a 2-way contract. Because then from the player's perspective, I think what a lot of players realize is training camp is very short now. Guys do not play a lot. And more often than not, if you're on training camp is also very hard to I mean, there's one or two guys that maybe have a very impressive training camp, but for most guys, it's normally probably a B- to C+ experience. So I think a lot of guys know that and just kind of understand that if you're a player on a one-way contract and you have a C training camp, they're probably more likely and inclined to keep you on that roster. Even you might start as the 13th forward or the 7th D-man. But a lot of guys fear if they go into camp and do have that C training camp or whatever you want to call it and don't have an A+ camp, they're going to end up on waivers. And I think that that's stressful for guys. And I mean, you see it, like guys get picked off waivers a lot during the year when teams are injured and kind of, but I mean, those first couple days during training camp, like it's really hard to get picked off waivers just because everyone's healthy and so many teams are still looking at prospects and other guys.
Interesting. Let's move over from free agency to video games, and fresh off winning another Stanley Cup, Matthew Tkachuk was named the cover model for the new EA Sports NHL26 game. Not a lot of fans are happy about this, and partially because Matthew Tkachuk is quote unquote a rat, and the rats are taking over. And I love this. I'm a big WWE fan, so I like the whole the heel role. And I think Matthew Tkachuk, as along with Sam Bennett, Brad Marchand, these guys play that heel role to a T. And question for you, Ryan, is Matthew Tkachuk now sort of replacing Auston Matthews as the more recognizable U.S.-born hockey player?
You know what? I think that's legitimate. I think it obviously helps that Tkachuk plays in the United States, whereas, Matthews is in Toronto. And it also helps that Tkachuk has been to the past 3 Stanley Cup finals now and won 2 of them. What we've seen during those runs, when Tkachuk is healthy, obviously, but even like on the media days, and, like 2 years ago, like People magazine did a story on Matthew Tkachuk. And, that's something that we're not used to in hockey, to have sort of a mainstream middle of the road publication take interest in one of the athletes. And I think, Tkachuk is definitely suited for the role. He grew up around NHL arenas, obviously his dad being Keith Tkachuk and having such a long career in the NHL. So Matthew's used to it. He has that outgoing personality. He has that whole fun thing, with his brother Brady, and all the stories about them growing up together and getting into scraps and all that good stuff and all the extended family. But I also think that, hockey culture is so unique in sports, where in Canada, we're used to it, right? The humble hockey player that doesn't like to make waves. And like Auston Matthews does not make waves when he speaks, right? Like it's very much, the hockey player answers, and he's not trying to get anyone in trouble. Matthew Tkachuk, obviously, he loves to feed into that, and I wonder if like the American sporting press is just a little more in tune with, like, they can work with Tkachuk a little bit more, even though Matthews does have those, he has the fashion interests and things like that, and he hangs out with Justin Bieber. But with Tkachuk, they can sort of get some grist for the mill, right? And he is outgoing. He's, if
you're going to draw in the U.S. fan, Ryan, like the general fan, you're going to draw him in with fights and trash talking, which is exactly what the Tkachuk brothers both like. Look at the Four Nations face-off. Like, both guys were on Fox News and, Pat McAfee's show. They weren't talking about goal scoring. They're talking about scrapping, right?
Totally. And I think for, like the casual American fan, it's easier for them to latch on to that and be like, oh yeah, hockey, fighting, it's like tough guys and, good goals as well. But like, it's easier for them to latch on to, I would think. I mean, Drew, you would have a different perspective, obviously, being American and living in America, where you see more of the ESPN and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the biggest disservice to the growth of the game in hockey over the last 10 or 15 years is this hockey culture where players are really afraid to kind of step outside the box and be themselves. I mean, certainly I think that there should be a level of respect, but I mean, even if you talk about the way the Florida Panthers were celebrating when they won the Stanley Cup, I mean, they were clearly trolling the Edmonton Oilers. And I mean, that got picked up by ESPN, and that's what like the general fan like can relate to. And I mean, you see it in all these other sports, like even like, for example, my wife hates golf. It's her least favorite sport. If I gave up golf, it'd be her number one gift I could ever give her. But like when Netflix released that golf documentary and they really showed the players what they go through, their lives, like how they handle their families, she became a fan of some of the golfers. So I think hockey for so long, like players, like hockey fans, there's certain fans who love the game, but the only way to really grow the game is to make like your average person kind of fall in love with the storylines behind the game. And I think that the Florida Panthers have done an amazing job, which is led by Matthew Tkachuk for that. You know what I mean? I think that, like I said, it's like normally, like I haven't seen too many. There have been a lot of Stanley Cup celebrations that are all pretty generic, but because of kind of the way that these guys were going about it, obviously there was a humor element to some of the stuff that they were doing, but it's getting picked up by the big shows, the Pat McAfee shows and everything like that. So, I mean, guys like Auston Matthews who have really kind of pushed the boundaries. And I mean, there's so many people who might not know hockey, but know Auston Matthews because he's on the cover of, I don't know, Vogue or whatever he's on the cover of, and guys like Matthew Tkachuk. And I mean, you see it in the NBA, right? Like the NBA is literally a reality show off the court. I mean, between guys getting traded, guys trash talking each other. So, I mean, as a guy who wants to see the game of hockey grow, I love it. And I think that like Matthew Tkachuk is a guy who's been able to do it in his own way. And I think is great for the sport.
Yeah, and it doesn't help or hurt that he's just a terrific player. Like you take away this, you know, he's not known as a fighter. Like, he's known as a really good player. He drags everyone into the fight. So, you know, much deserved having him on the cover. The only thing I would say is they should have had Brady Tkachuk there with them, or at least the other two rats in Florida had another trifecta there.
Well, it's so funny they added Marchand to the mix like at the deadline for what they did, because like it just couldn't have been like a more perfect kind of trio with those guys, which like makes the rest of the league and fan bases hate them all even more than they kind of already did. But it's pretty humorous from that perspective.
No, we all love it. So, you know, I think EA Sports nailed it here. If you haven't been paying attention, the hockeynews.com has been running summer splash rankings where we literally rank teams 1 through 32 and how big of a splash they made in free agency and just off-season moves. So we're about halfway through our rankings in the summer right now, and coming up is Detroit. And, you know, question for you, Ryan, like Detroit Red Wings, they added John Gibson as their number one goalie. This is a team that hasn't been in the playoffs forever. Like they still haven't, you know, baptized formally Little Caesars Arena with a playoff game. Did they do enough in your mind, Ryan, in terms of the splash they made, and can it get them into a wild card spot?
I think it's possible. I have more optimism for the Red Wings than I have in the past. And, you know, John Gibson has a lot to prove here. You know, I mean, he's been banged up in recent years. He lost the starter's job to Lucas Dostal in Anaheim, and Dostal has been fantastic for the Ducks. But, you know, I mean, I think John Gibson, you know, we were talking about Sergei Bobrovsky earlier, you know, goaltenders age differently than skaters, right? Like you can be a top end goaltender in your late 30s. We've seen, you know, Marc-Andre Fleury win a Vezina in his late 30s, and obviously Bobrovsky going back-to-back Cup champion. So I think Gibson still has road to drive on. Now is his chance to really prove that he is still that number one guy that was so good for Anaheim for so long. Otherwise, I think that, you know, with more internal growth, Detroit should be able to take that next step. You know, you look at a guy like Marco Kasper, who is still, you know, in the infancy of his NHL career. Simon Edvinsson on the back end. If he continues to grow and they can rely more on him and more at Sider than some of their other defensemen, then I think they're in a good position where, you know, Dylan Larkin and Lucas Raymond are obviously the drivers on that team. But with a little more support and, you know, bringing back Patrick Kane, who obviously has seen it all in his career, I think they will be in the mix, and it should certainly be a goal to grab a wild card spot. Like it'll be disappointing for real if they don't make the playoffs this time. It won't just be like, oh, we're still growing. It's like, no, this is the time where you should be taking that step. Like, there's no excuses about goaltending anymore.
Right. How about you, Drew? Like, obviously that Atlantic division, it's not easy. Let's put it that way. Like, the top 3 spots already seem like they're spoken for. So you're really looking at trying to beat out Ottawa or Montreal or a team from the Metro for that wild card.
Yeah, I love the addition of John Gibson. I think he is going to be a guy who's going to get back to playing at the level that he was. And I think he's going to have kind of a similar effect to maybe like a Cam Fowler, as a guy who's an elite player who's been in Anaheim on a really bad team for a long time. And we saw it with Cam Fowler when he got to St. Louis, seemed completely rejuvenated. With that being said, I do like their young players, but I still don't, if I had to bet on it, I would think that they do not make the playoffs again. But I do think, like you said, that should be a goal of theirs. And I mean, if their young players can take that step quicker than maybe I'm expecting, I think they can get in. Obviously, as an American kid, love Patrick Kane. Having him come back, I think is going to be great. And I think the Gibson addition was fantastic.
Let's move on from Detroit to the West, where Vancouver is also going to be one of the teams that's coming up in our summer splash rankings. Interesting summer for Vancouver. They re-signed a lot of guys that I didn't think they were going to be able to re-sign. Everyone from Brock Besser to Thatcher Demko were brought back. They also, were able to sign Evander Kane, a BC native, but they traded Arturs Shilovs, and then hired Adam Foote as a coach. The Pacific is maybe the opposite of the Atlantic in terms of, it's a little weaker of a division once you get past the top 2 teams. Did Vancouver do enough, Drew, where you're saying to them, this should be a playoff team?
Yeah, I love I've been a longtime friend of Adam Foote for a long time. And I think that, I know there's some people had criticized his lack of head coaching experience, but the guy has played with the best players in the world, won Olympic gold medals, won Stanley Cups. And I think the biggest thing for me with him is I just know that he's a guy who kind of will drag, almost has a Matthew Tkachuk effect from behind the bench. You know what I mean? There's no way you're going out as a player with him coaching and not playing hard. You see it among guys, there's certain teams in the league and certain coaches who maybe guys don't respect as much, but he had so much success in the league and has such a presence that you're not going out on the penalty kill and not blocking a shot and wanting to come back to the bench and hear his reaction. And I think it's the same thing, right? So I think that the culture of Vancouver is going to change a lot. If Evander Kane is healthy and playing the way Evander Kane can play, I think that that's a huge addition. They don't have, there's not a lot of that in the league in general today of the Tom Wilson, Evander Kane. So I know he's been banged up. So I like that addition. Brock Besser's a guy who can clearly put the puck in the net, which they need. And so I think that I would expect them differently than I said to Detroit. I think that they make the playoffs, and I think a lot of it has to do with who they have behind the bench.
It's funny because I think they're in a very similar situation to Detroit in that, the Pacific, you can basically pencil in Vegas, Edmonton, Los Angeles, I think, as playoff teams. And for Vancouver, it's not so much the other Pacific teams you might be battling. It would be good to see Anaheim take a step, but I don't know if they're going to take that big a step just yet. But you do have to worry about 5 teams in the Central because you have Colorado, Dallas, Winnipeg at the top, and then you have Utah and St. Louis that both look very dangerous, and Minnesota for that matter. So
and I almost Nashville too.
Maybe, I don't know. I think
I thought they were a playoff team last year, and it was obviously just it
was a disaster for Nashville.
It was a poop show.
Recover. I think that for me, Drew, I loved what you said about Adam Foote, and I think that is going to be a factor. I believe that the Canucks will go as Evander Kane goes, right? Yeah. And if he can be that 30-goal, power forward who just goes out there and plays hard and scores goals, then that's great. If he starts getting bogged down in off-ice stuff or, if it's not working, like you talked about, the expectations that Adam Foote has, if Evander Kane doesn't live up to those expectations, do we see him in the doghouse like we did at times in Edmonton? I think that's going to be the big X factor, is if you get good Evander Kane, then Vancouver could be a playoff team. If you get bad Evander Kane, then we could have a redux of last season where it's just like constant drama with like Canucks fans and media.
No more drama. We don't need drama there. We need Quinn Hughes to stay in Vancouver.
Fair.
True. I mean, I just think too, like, I know him a little bit, but I think being back in his hometown as a guy who clearly enjoys the spotlight and stuff, I think we're going to see the best version we can see from him.
It's kind of crazy. This is his third Canadian team he's played for too, which is, you don't see that a whole lot anymore.
Yeah.
No.
If you count Buffalo, it's 4.
Right.
It's never too early to talk about Olympics. Obviously, Canada invited, seemed like 100 players to their Olympic camp, but only 3 goalies for whatever reason. We're going to have a ton of Olympic coverage in the next probably 4 to 6 months. Let's just talk generally speaking here. Olympic rankings. When we're talking about best forward core, best defense, best goaltender, let's go through it here. Who's got the best forwards in your mind? And we don't know who's on this team, but we can probably handicap 90% of the groups here. Let's start with you, Ryan. Which country has the edge when it comes to wingers and centers?
For me, it's Canada. I mean, Team USA is going to be very strong as well, but you think about the level of competition that Team Canada is going to have, it's going to be absolutely wild. And, at the top end, you're going to have McDavid and McKinnon, who are probably the 2 best players in the world, and Sidney Crosby, who is like potentially a top 5 player of all time, who we have seen is still at the top of his game. So, you build out from there, and, I haven't even mentioned Point, Reinhardt, Hagel, like all these guys that will fit in behind those players. I think that the Canadians are just going to come in waves, and there will be no break for their opponents.
Drew, do you agree with Ryan here? Feel free to, say that this is the most talent that US has had up front, but, what do you think?
Unfortunately, as an American, I do agree with Ryan. I think that they clearly are the most talented team. Now, I think that gap has maybe closed a little bit over the last several years with some of the players the Americans have. And then the other thing, I think, it would be great to have a final similar to the 4 nations that we just saw. But I think the other thing, too, that's funny, especially we were talking about the goaltending position, is I don't think that Jordan Binnington is the best goalie. But in a one game that matters, if I had to have a goalie in my net, it just seems like over his career, he would be the guy that I would pick. And I just think that he has this ability where, I don't think for 40 games he can necessarily be the best goalie in the NHL. And I mean, yes, you can argue Bobrovsky and Vasilevsky and some of these guys, but he's just shown an ability when kind of it matters the most to play great. So, I mean, I'm pumped for the Olympics after the 4 nations, but I think it's hard to argue that kind of anyone has more skill up front than Canada does.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. Yeah, I think it's just an embarrassment of riches, as always. And there's going to be a lot of players not on the Olympic team where you're going, oh boy, you could, again, form another team. How about on defense, though? Because here's why I think the U.S. probably has the edge, but, Sweden is also coming with a big defense core. What do we think, Drew? Let's start us off. Who's got the edge when it comes to defense?
Yeah, like you said, I think this could be the one time where you could argue the Americans are right there, maybe on par with Canada. But, I mean, to me, Cale Makar is still the best defenseman on the planet by a lot. But I think guys it was cool to see a guy like Slavin, who plays in Carolina, doesn't get talked about at all kind of by the league media. And then obviously the way he played at the 4 nations kind of brought a lot of recognition to just how good of a defensive defenseman he is. But yeah, Sweden has a ton of good players. It'll be interesting to see too, like you said, I mean, some of these teams are going to have some very tough decisions to make, especially on the back end.
I'll go with Team USA on this because we didn't actually see their best at the Four Nations due to injury, right? Like
Yeah.
Quinn Hughes, Charlie McAvoy are like the headliners. And, Hughes didn't play at all. McAvoy only played some of the tournament on top of Slavin, Faber, Hannafin, Jake Sanderson. I think the U.S. is just kind of bulletproof back there. And then, the Swedes are very interesting too with Dahlin and Hedman and Ekholm. We'll see about Erik Karlsson, but they have a lot of decisions to make as well, and that'll be kind of fun.
Yeah,
I think
I'm going U.S. too with that one.
I think an important thing that Canada's done really well in these international tournaments, maybe better than the U.S. in the past over the last 20 years, is just kind of select players that are the best for certain roles. You see it a lot like on the Canada's World Junior team. Canada, prior to the last couple of years, has had more World Junior success than everyone, but there's always the guy who has 50 goals and 130 points who they get left off the roster. And a lot of people are kind of outraged by that because they choose a third line guy who maybe has 20 goals during the regular season. But I think that's a really critical piece during these international tournaments that, like I said, Canada has historically done well is like, if you're going to have a guy who's a first line center in the NHL, but is not going to be he's going to be a third or fourth line center on that Olympic team, are you better off taking the best third or fourth line center that you have available in the NHL? So it's very role specific. And I think it'll be interesting to see how some of these kind of GMs or guys who are running these teams are able to kind of navigate that.
Yeah. And you make a good point. Like the Four Nations, what's his name from Edmonton? Bouchard doesn't get named to the team. Instead, they take, Travis Sanheim, they take Colton Parayko for that exact reason. Like those guys fit the role more. How about goaltending? You mentioned it off the start there, Drew, with Jordan Binnington. When you look at his regular season stats, you wouldn't say he's a better goalie than Connor Hellebuck or even Jeremy Swayman or Jake Ottinger. But, is he enough where Canada has the edge? And are you kind of surprised that Canada's only invited 3 guys to this camp and no Logan Thompson, no Darcy Kemper?
I'm not that surprised because I feel like Canada kind of has it locked in on who they're going to go with. I have to give him the edge. I should know this. This is a side question for you guys, but it's confirmed, or we're 100% confirmed that Russia is not participating.
Yeah, they're out.
Like that.
They would have the edge.
Yeah, I was going to bring. That's what I was thinking about. But obviously, like from a hockey only perspective, we don't need to go into anything else here. But for these international tournaments, that's a huge blow to the quality of competition. And some of the game's best players are clearly Russian, especially in net, for example. So I think that's a little bit disappointing from a strictly hockey perspective.
Mm. Yeah, on paper, Team USA has the best goaltenders. You mentioned them, Mike, Hellebuck, Ottinger, Swayman. That's a murderer's row. But it is funny, as Drew mentioned, like I almost feel like Jordan Binnington is like Mariano Rivera now when he was like the closer with the Yankees, where it's like as soon as the other team sees him come out, it's like, oh boy, like we're going to be in trouble here. So I think there's like an interesting mental edge that Binnington has over the world right now.
Awesome. All right. The big show is presented by Sticks.com. Why break the bank on sticks when you can get a pro level composite stick without the pro price tag at Sticks.com? That's STIX.com. Head over and gear up. And with that, we go right to rapid fire. And, I'm going to go start us off with World Junior talk, Ryan. And this is, this is probably your favorite discussion. Word is, after the camps that just happened, that Canada might be back to being the quote unquote favorite for the 2026 World Juniors. And, obviously the U.S. has won back to back. What do you think, Ryan? Agree or disagree? Canada is the fave.
I agree. And I say that as somebody that picked Team USA to win gold the past 2 years. That was like the golden age of American World Junior hockey right there in terms of success and the players they had. But, Canada returns with like goalies that have been there before. Gavin McKenna will be on the team. Porter Martone, Caden Lindstrom, like they're going to have a ton of talent. Also, crucially, Dale Hunter behind the bench. When you have what I would argue is, if not the best major junior coach in history, certainly like top 2 or top 3. He knows how to win, and he knows how to motivate his players. Team USA, I think they'll be in the mix, but I don't know who their goaltender will be. And I'm a little worried about their center depth behind James Higgins. So I think they'll probably still be in the medal hunt, but it's not going to be like the past 2 years where they were like definitely the favorite.
Drew Shore, you played in the 2011 World Juniors, I believe, in Buffalo. What's your take on this? Is agree or disagree that Canada is the favorite?
It pains me, but yes, they are. Like Ryan said, I think the biggest differentiator this year is Dave Carl is not returning to coach the Americans, and Dale Hunter is coaching the Canadiens. I believe Dave Carl is the best coach in the world outside the NHL right now. And Dale Hunter is a guy who's had arguably, like you said, maybe the best like Canadian junior coaching record ever. So I would say that Canada is the favorite due to the USA, Dave Carl not being there and Dale Hunter being at it.
Yeah, and Mark Hunter, I believe, is picking the team too, Ryan. So that's another thing to consider, because those London teams are always it's a good synergy. Question 2, Matthew Schaefer, who may or may not be on that World Junior squad. Agree or disagree? Matthew Schaefer or the field. Who's winning the Calder Trophy for next season? What would you take?
I'll take the field, because you have Alexander Nikishin in Carolina, who's like an older rookie. He'll be 24 during the season. And you have Ivan Demidov in Montreal, who's going to have the chance to put up a lot of points. I think Schaefer could be very good for the Islanders right away, but will he put up a lot of points? I don't know, just because how much offense is New York going to be able to put together?
Defenseman won the Calder this year. What do you think, Drew? Is it going to be 2 years in a row?
I would take the field as well. I think he's obviously a fantastic player, but like Ryan just alluded to, like they just don't score a lot as a team. And it is hard to win that trophy as a defenseman unless you don't have to have great numbers, but you have to have, I would say, solid numbers. Is it Demidov in Montreal, like came in and obviously showed he's capable of producing at that level already. So I would take the field, and no disrespect to him, I think he's going to be a great player, but I think, and it also does, it does take defensemen generally a little bit longer to adapt to the NHL than it does forwards.
All right. I'm going to be the contrarian. I'm going to say Schaefer. So you heard it here. Matthew Schaefer wins the Calder. I'm sure Stefan Rosner and with the Islanders will be happy about that. Okay, so Auston Matthews loses Mitch Marner, his running mate, as a winger. So William Nylander, who finished with 45 goals and was the runner-up to the Rocket Richard, or Auston Matthews, who 2 years ago nearly scored 70 goals. Who finishes with more goals next season?
I'll take Matthews.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I'm taking Matthews. I think that he's clearly just been super banged up for the last couple of years. Hasn't been healthy. I think he's going to be healthy. And like I said, Nylander is a fantastic player as well. But the loss of Marner hurts that squad a lot, especially from an offensive standpoint. As a guy who's an elite playmaker, obviously people criticize a lot of different parts of his game, but there's one thing he's doing and very good at, and it's distributing the puck. So I think that loss is going to hurt both of those players, especially on the power play. But I think that Auston Matthews will bounce back.
Yeah, maybe a better question should have been Jack Eichel or Auston Matthews, who scores more goals, because Eichel playing with Marner, he could end up winning his first Rocket.
That's a good call. That'd be interesting.
Okay, so word is Alex Ovechkin is now partnered with a Russian tech company and will be in a streaming platform to produce a movie, series, or documentary about his life. I'll be first in line to watch this thing, if it ever becomes a movie. But what other player, past or present, do you think deserves the movie treatment like an Ovechkin is going to get?
Jaromir Jagr is the obvious one, because he's literally still playing hockey right now.
Yes.
But you have the whole Olympics. Apparently they had a ballet based on that Olympic gold medal win. in Czechia. But that dude's life is just like incredible. So I would go Yager.
That was a great call. When you asked that, I was stumped for a bit. But I mean, yeah, I don't know how old he is now, but I mean, how long he's been able to play the game. But I mean, I was thinking like the Ovechkin one's great because he's such a character off the ice. Like, I mean, you think of a guy like Sidney Crosby, who's had probably one of the best careers of all time. Like, I don't know if his would be quite as interesting from a media perspective as Ovechkin's would have been.
Yeah. The other one is, remember there was talk about a John Scott movie? You know, him going to the All-Star game and all that. Like, that could be fun still. I don't know if you guys saw it, but so the Seattle Kraken, their mascot, which is a troll, I think his name is Buoy, and forward John Hayden were out in an Alaskan river the other day and shooting a promo. And during this promo, a bear comes running up into the water and is chasing them off the screen. So, you know, no one was hurt. The mascot didn't hang around to fight it, but is this a sign that the Boston Bruins are going to have a better season than the Seattle Kraken this year? Or am I reading a little too much into it?
That's a great one. Head to head, maybe the Bruins take a game off the Kraken. That was a harrowing video, by the way. At first, I'm like, the Bear's not that close. It's like, ooh, the Bear's getting very close right now. And I don't know. I don't think that mascot is very, it's not very dexterous. It's not going to be able to get out of the way. But I think if the Kraken have fewer points than the Bruins, something has gone very wrong.
I don't love the Kraken roster.
No, that's fair.
And like it's very just mid to me. Boston, I feel like pretty much everything that could have gone wrong went wrong for them last year. So I think the Bruins finish higher in the standings or have more points than Seattle.
You know what? I think the Bruins are going to be a sneaky good team this year. Like, you know, they've got Swayman, they've got McAvoy, who, if he's healthy, is a top 5 defenseman, and they still got Pasta. You know, I was kind of disappointed they didn't go big into free agency, but I still think they're going to be, you know, I think they're not going to be the worst team in the Atlantic. That's for sure.
No, that's true. And Marco Sturm, I think he could be a very good head coach right off the hop.
Yeah. All right. So with that is the big show, folks. Thanks for listening in, and stay out of, if you're in the waters, watch out for bears, please, and watch out for octopus as well. Like, I'm surprised there wasn't a Kraken there that pulled a bear under the water. But for Ryan Kennedy and Drew Shore, I'm Michael Traikos. This was the big show, and we will see you all next week.